We're now going to discuss Michelangelo, another great of the High Renaissance. And Michelangelo, he was known as being quite a difficult man. So Leonardo was kind of known as this scholar, this gentleman, right, of academia almost. And Michelangelo was known as being sort of surly and rude and tempestuous and just difficult. So it's interesting how their personalities play into their works as well. For instance, thinking about who he really thought he was, Michelangelo, he identified as being a sculptor. And he, knew that Leonardo identified as a painter. And so that was a little bit of rivalry between the two figures. But for Michelangelo, he felt sculpting was where it's at. He said that he considered like sculpting, like bringing something to life, like taking a piece of marble and bringing it to life, coaxing right life out of this inanimate object. So you think about this, and he talked about how it was almost godlike. You can kind of start to get a sense that he had a bit of an ego about who he was and his skills. But he wasn't wrong. So you look at the David and you go, well, he wasn't wrong. Um, and again, you can compare this version to Donatello's and think about that this isn't quite the youthful boy that Donatello created. This is much more of a man. And you can also think about where this David is in the process. You'll notice he's shown before the battle, where he's shown very contemplative and he's thinking. And so to me, he's like a very true Renaissance idea of thought and understanding, right? He's thinking through what he's going to do. And of course, he's a perfect example of like the Greco-Roman body that these artists were trying to revive right again. So it's a super example of his sculptural skills. But funny enough, and here's a compare and contrast again between the two, so reminding you of Donatello's. Funny enough, the project that Michelangelo is most well known for is, of course, the Sistine Chapel, and it's a painting project. So there's a lot of story behind this one, where the Pope, wanted him to do this project, and he tried to say no and tried to run back to Florence and say no way, no day. And the Pope sent the Swiss Guard after him, and they threatened to starve all of Florence. And again, you can see that Michelangelo was kind of a saucy guy, but the Pope is the Pope. He doesn't take no for an answer. So eventually, Michelangelo agrees to paint the Sistine Chapel. The first part of the project, of course, is the ceiling, but Michelangelo also did that back wall later on during the Mannerist period. So the Last Judgment you see on the back wall is also Michelangelo's painting, but again from a later time. So the ceiling proper is what we're looking at here. And it's really quite amazing because the ceiling was a flat ceiling that he made look architectural. So all those architectural items you're seeing are not real, they're painted. It's quite incredible. And the cycle that he painted was the creation, from the creation of the sun, right, the light and the dark, and so on and so forth, all the way through to the flood. So they're Genesis stories that you see painted here. And again, as I mentioned, Pope Julius II, he was influential. He's the one who said, I want you to come and I want you to paint this. And he demanded Michelangelo participate in the project. So again, here's another shot looking up into the project. And again, you can look at the idea of the creation all the way down through the flood scene, the Genesis stories. And there's a lot of misconceptions about this. One used to be the color of the piece. Once they cleaned it, they realized the colors they thought were used weren't really used. There's, of course, the common misconception that Michelangelo was laying on his back with all the paint dripping in his eyes. And you can look at his own notebook page and know that's not true. So there's a lot of things that people misunderstand. Here are just a few of the famous panels from the Sistine Chapel ceiling. Creation of Man, of course, I think is one of the most famous. So I always show this one, where you see God sort of swooping in to give life to man. But many people suggest that Michelangelo put his own thoughts in here because, like, Adam's already alive, and so there's other sort of theories there. Here are like a nice tile showing you a lot of the different images: the flood, the separation of light and dark, and the different symbols that are there. There are these little prophet women that they're shown along the sides as well. This is all fresco painting. So again, if you go back and look at your painting chapter and look at fresco, the painting with plaster, right? This is that technique. Many people note that the bodies look very sculptural because Michelangelo was a sculptor, so that you can kind of see that coming through right in the design. As I mentioned, the Last Judgment was actually painted later during the Mannerist period along the back wall, but that was also his work as well. It's very sort of dark, right? It's the Last Judgment, so it's very dark. And it's even said that St. Bartholomew there is holding his flayed skin, but that the skin has Michelangelo's self-portrait on it to suggest that, this was a huge burden, right, that Michelangelo had to take on twice, not just even once, twice, right, to paint here at the Sistine Chapel. I also want to talk to you about Raphael. This is the third of the group, and his famous School of Athens, or what's called philosophy, that was painted for the papal apartments. And there actually was four subjects that were painted here. So you'll notice those: philosophy, theology, law, and poetry. That were painted for the four walls, right, of the papal apartments. And the piece itself was cleaned. So you'll notice I'm showing you one before it was cleaned, right? And then this is what it looked like after it was cleaned. So you'll notice the coloration that a lot of these were thought to be once you clean them. You're like, oh no, I was wrong about that. And if you look at it, you'll notice the use of linear perspective creates a very, again, controlled composition, just like you saw in the Last Supper. This piece you'll find in the center, Plato and Aristotle. And so you'll notice that they're there in the center. Plato points upwards because he believed in the ideal forms, and Aristotle points downwards because he believed in empirical evidence. And so the philosophers, in a sense, are divided into the two camps related to these two philosophers. Again, there was like portraits hidden here. Michelangelo is said to be here in the front, Raphael kind of hanging out over here to the side. So the artist would often place themselves in the piece as well. And again, if you're thinking about linear perspective, you'll notice that how the construction is used here on the piece.